Great. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. And it's my pleasure today that we have Michael Berry with us. Michael is a consulting professor at Stanford D School, or the Design School. And today's format is maybe a little different from what some of you who attend these sessions may be used to. Michael and I are going to have a conversation about design thinking, and specifically not only some background on design thinking, but also how that plays in the world of more of a process-centered kind of an environment. But to start with, Michael, share a little bit about your background. It's quite interesting in how you've gotten to the D School and also some of the things that you do beyond that.
Yeah, the D School is an interesting venture. I have taught at Stanford a course called Need Finding for a lot of years, and the D School was a venture at Stanford that said, let's figure out how we not just teach engineers and designers, but start teaching other branches of engineering, other areas of the school about this thing called design, with the belief that we can help whatever you're doing, whether it's biochemistry or computer science, with the skills that designers have. So that was kind of the starting point for the D.
Great. So in terms of your background, you teach at the D School, and for those who haven't had a chance to see that, it's a non-traditional, interesting place. The philosophy behind that in terms of this interdisciplinary approach and bringing together, it's rather unique even at Stanford, but also in general.
Yeah, the core philosophy in the D is that people learn best by doing, and that they've created an environment that you basically build and develop design thinking skills through project work. And project work, things that are important, not just to you, but to essentially a larger community, things that are going to make a difference. There's an enormous push about this idea of extreme collaboration. Everything is done in teams, with the belief that at the end of the day, you are going to go out and work with teams. So how do you really be creative in groups? So that's really essential. In terms of my own practice, I also do a course in the D called Cross-Cultural Design, where we take and partner with Peking University and do an exchange between Stanford engineering students, Peking University engineering students, and have them solve a problem that has to work in both cultures. In terms of background, I work with lots of marketers, designers, engineers, business people, have gotten the chance to do design research in lots of different countries, and for lots of different kinds of work, whether it's product, service, new category development, and as I said, for lots of different companies, and companies that are both high-tech, consumable, nonprofits, and entities around the world. So it's kind of this background that we want to share with our students, the belief that these are tools that can be applied in a lot of different contexts where innovation and creativity is essential. That's what you want to get out of it at the end, but it's going to be applied in sort of non-traditional, potentially we're going to have computer science people, biochem, educators. They need creativity. They need that sense of seeing the world differently just as much as a designer who has to come up with a new iPhone.
I think it brings up an interesting point. You know, when we talk about what is design thinking, I think there's a sense out there, particularly in this more process environment, the world of project program management, the sense that design thinking is a product, you know, it's for product designers. It's the IDEOs of the world. It's the Apples. And I know, just kind of a side note, we were chatting, and you once had an interesting question. What came first, innovation or design thinking? Someone asked. I'm just kind of curious. Maybe you could provide a little perspective on that.
Yeah, certainly there is a lot of buzz about design thinking, and it feels like, gee, maybe is it a fad or a trend? I would say it's a really good question. Innovation is essentially the thing we're interested in, and we have always had innovation. Right? And I think what design thinking is looking at is how do we increase the chance that we're going to get interesting, compelling innovation more often. And just to clarify, it's easy to mistake invention for innovation. And invention is coming up with something new. And the patent offices are full of wonderful new things that nobody wants. part of innovation and part of the foundation of innovation is that that new thing fits into our world, makes that world in some way better, creates new value, satisfies needs, which is sort of the foundation of my course. And design thinking is a way of more consistently bringing together the kind of deep knowledge of people and culture that you need to have in order to get that invention, that's something new, to actually stick, to actually work. And you know, I think we came from a place where we see, you know, graveyards products that have failed, where we've put phenomenal technology, energy, human resource and capital, and it hasn't connected. We look at pad-based computing, and that was something that we spent 20, 30 years pursuing, and we just got it right. We just got it right. And I think the foundation here is how can we more consistently get it right? And that's where design thinking came from.
It's interesting, I think, again, in terms of some people who may say, well, how does this fit in a world, particularly we've got a lot of individuals who participate in the Advanced Project Management Program who come from a world of IC and process. And we're going to talk about that a bit more later. But if you think about, we're all chartered with thinking more innovatively, looking at more creative ways to implement. And quite frankly, it's that transition to adoption, which often is what undermines the successful completion of initiatives or projects. And you're speaking to that. I think there's a parallel. Let's explore design thinking a little bit more in terms of understanding it. We'd like to take a little bit, and I think, you know, we've talked a little bit about design thinking not being just for designers and maybe why it's a bit relevant beyond just product design. But maybe before we jump into an overview to a way of thinking about that and some of the framework and tools, share a little bit more about why you see the kind of the relevancies and potentially, let me ask this a little differently. If you think about where you've seen this applied, what's kind of the most seemingly out there kind of way that design thinking was applied that someone wouldn't have thought, this isn't a place where design thinking can benefit?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a curveball question.
No. I would say, and I'm going to use an example that I don't know if it's unusual, but I started talking about iPhones and iPads, and for a lot of years, we kind of looked at the kind of single functionality of pad. Is it a computer? Is it simply a smaller version? Right? And then we threw telephony on top of it. And what was fascinating, and Steve Jobs gets a lot of credit at being a visionary, and certainly was, but he was very opposed to the idea that the iPhone and the apps be an open source system. He really wanted it to be owned. And a lot of people in the company felt very differently. And Steve at that time had some liver replacement, so he wasn't on scene. And suddenly the apps became something that a set of tools that could be shared were created and offered to a larger community. And if I had to say what is the success of that platform, it is the ability, not of Apple, to be unbelievably creative. And yes, Apple has been. But it's the ability to offer the tools to now just not 100 designers, 1,000 designers. We now have a set of tools that 1 million designers are looking at their lives, understanding them, and going, I now have a medium that I can fix what's going on with me, and I can offer it back out. The iPhone and Apple's success, in large measure, came from something that Steve was actually very opposed to, that ability to share, right? The creativity with non-designers. And yet, that is a phenomenal, and you talk to any manufacturing company at this point in Asia, US, Japan, and it's not the hardware. It's not the hardware. It's the apps, and it's because the apps create experiences, and they're experiences that you cannot get elsewhere, and that's where the real value is. So in this sense, suddenly that shift of taking what was simply an app that presumably could have been owned and controlled by Apple, and if you look at all the other predecessors, they'd try to really bound that. And suddenly it became an open source, creative way of solving everybody's problems. And that, to me, is an interesting example where suddenly needs and leveraging everyone's creative design thinking became an unbelievable success. And at the end of the day, Apple still owns it. Apple still, that kind of valence of success, of creativity, of coolness, still comes back to them. So it's an interesting sense of, as I said, we like to think about design thinking as a combination of creativity and analytic thinking, going back and forth between those, but always grounded in a deep knowledge. And the fascinating thing about apps is it is everyone's own first-person experience that gets it started. And it's at a scale that I can do something about it.
So I think it's a great transition as we look at design thinking and dive a little deeper in terms of defining it. Share with us a little bit. We've got 5 different statements that may look like statements that folks are writing out, but they're not statements. They're much more than that.
Yeah. So it's also easy, and we talk about there is a design process or a design thinking process, and if we teach the process, engage the process, out will pop amazing things. And of course, as anybody who's taken an engineering course, right, you know, learning the process of, you know, determining stress and strength doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to do it well. So I think what we've seen is within design thinking, the process is actually less important, meaning the stepping through a tightly described set of activities than a set of really important tools that are going to be used by a group a little more intuitively, a little more in response to the situation they find themselves in. And those tools, as you said, are something more. They're kind of a foundation of thinking about problems differently and essentially getting around a lot of the stumbling blocks that more traditional analytic thinking, some systems thinking can get groups into, where they often they box themselves in. And by the way, we believe design thinking is on top of those other modes of thinking. Critical thinking, systems thinking, all very, very important. But it's how do we do better? It's a yes and phenomena, right? Yes to those things and this as well. So first one, and it's this idea of observing with empathy, that sense of not just being an expert, knowing the answers, but seeing what is very difficult to see and is always around you. These are the rules and norms that guide people's lives, often guide your lives. And the point is you can't change things until you can see them clearly. So a lot of what we teach is how do you see that world you're in? See the things that go without being stated, that you take for granted, or are almost invisible to you. And it's often the most difficult to see things that are the most important to innovation, creating value, and we find clues. We find clues, and those clues lead to insights, and that gets to the next thing, which is this idea of asking why. In a university, that's actually a really hard question to ask. We got here because we knew the answers. So to ask those dumb questions, those questions of what seems obvious but may be really, really critical, that's actually a skill we have to teach. And this sense of insights come from not just a flash, although on occasion those flashes happen and it's delightful when they do, but there's also building all of the models that help you see the complexity of the world you've just explored, hopefully reveal white space. So lots and lots of different approaches to modeling the world and being able to ask why. Why do things that don't exactly make sense make sense? One thing, and I think there's a very strong push towards data and data analytics. The difficulty there is you're often dealing only with correlation. This deals with causality. Why is something happening? And that you often have to get into people's lives. You have to get your hands dirty. You got to explore. And this gets into. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to ask.
Yeah.
I think these first two, it's very interesting in terms of even if we're developing a new system, we seem to know what the requirements are. There's often a standard kind of approach to doing that. There's gates we pass through.
Yeah.
We develop something, and then we get to the other end. And again, when it's time to hand it off and see people start using it and get full adoption, that's often where the resistance and barrier becomes. And it seems to me that our ability to really think a little differently, looking for those insights, gathering that data in potentially a different way, can help us kind of unearth what some of those issues are that aren't necessarily the technical requirements. It's more about how people are really going to use it. How's it going to save time or improve efficiency or work better, but also even a common interface might end up.
Your comment about kind of receiving a set of product specs and getting to work is a challenge because most of our engineers are very good at doing that. Most of our classes structure kind of work that way. The difference here is we also want our students to go, is that the right problem to be solving? What are the goals? And I got the problem you gave me, but maybe it isn't the most important problem to be solving to get at what you want, to what is in fact the goal of the project. So that's in this asking why. We're not just asking why of the outside world from research, we're also turning it inward. And that sense of coming up with a very different set of criteria. And perhaps one of those criteria is this the best question to get at what you want? So that's a new set of skills that we believe we're giving to our students. Another one, and this is, there's a very strong practice to get to the answer. We tend to create convergers, people who want to get to an answer quickly, efficiently, effectively, and move on. What you find is to get good ideas, you need to have a lot of ideas. And that ability to diverge, to be able to creatively solve a problem from many different points of view, and some of those points of view are different perspectives, to be able to really have a group use their skills, their ability to come at the problem, as I said, and if you've got a biologist and somebody who is an educator and an engineer and a business person together, they're going to solve that problem in a different way, and if they are only converging, coming to a single answer, you're not going to get the benefit of that group mind. That said, you do have to know how to converge. Right? In that sense of determining what is not just the best answer, right? Because we often do processes where who's going to win. And the big point of the design thinking is to essentially build the best answer. Out of these many answers, how do you find elements of both that will create the best solution to where you want to go? And that's as much about team dynamics as it is about putting out lots of Post-its and voting. Some of the other things, and this gets to another piece that's central to design thinking, central to our program, and I mentioned getting your hands dirty. It's both getting out in people's environments, but it's then putting solutions, very low-res solutions, very early out into people's hands to begin to evaluate your thinking. We have a tendency to not want to iterate and create lots of solutions. We want to get perfect solution, and what we found is really important is it takes a lot of courage to get your initial ideas out, try them out, and iterate a lot. And that sense of being able to creatively find ways to ask key questions of your service or product or process that you want to develop and test those very, very early on. The disaster we've seen over and over where immense amount of money are poured in and the fundamentals haven't actually been understood. So this is about getting those fundamentals understood, tested, and having a team involved in those, and your resolution starts to change as you start to build more knowledge through iterative cycles. The last piece, and this idea of storytelling, making ideas compelling, and it seems like, well, isn't that something that's more of an advertiser's job, or isn't that what you do with the final PowerPoint when you want to pitch your idea to the venture guys? And what we found is narrative and storytelling is essential both in data collection, meaning I need to understand stories. People will understand and communicate very complex ideas through stories. Stories are a way of making sense of the data. The other piece, though, is being able to craft a story of your idea, of your service, of what you're doing, and change behavior. Because if you've gone through all of this, have a fantastic idea, and it doesn't affect the organization you're in or the community around you, you've wasted your time and everybody else's. So this notion of how does narrative and storytelling tie all this together is critical. And this kind of creates an interesting both set of tools. It looks like a messy process, but I would argue it isn't. And it appears messy because it isn't always the same. But that, I think, is essential to a kind of the creative nature of what we're after.
And it's really an iterative process in terms of there is a process here, but I think of use cases, which is a more standard way, but push on that and think about, for instance, storytelling. That's an element of that can be applied up front, as well as when you're looking to gain acceptance throughout the process, and then when you're looking for implementation. So I think the opportunity for people to think about, as you've mentioned, look at the tools, recognize how they build, but also how they can be used in different times in different ways.
Beautiful.
And not be so locked into I can't generate ideas. Certainly we want to diverge and then converge.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely.
There's tools here that can be used and employed at different times.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And I think the goal in, as we said, the D School, and what we're doing through this sort of project-based learning is you need to practice using these. And you need to practice not in artificial situations, but where you got skin in the game, where it matters.
So it's a little off of what we had planned to talk about today, but maybe share with people just, I've had the opportunity to not only work and see at the D School, but also we have the class and the program, Project Innovation Through Design Thinking. Talk a little more about that importance of rolling up your sleeves and actually kind of doing and committing the time. But I think of maybe paint a little picture of what happens even when we're in that class, because I think it's quite a different way of thinking. And I'm smiling as I'm thinking about, people come. I had a friend that said, "Oh, you're just teaching kindergartners," and there's something to that, though, isn't there?
So, yeah, it's a funny one because you are not wrong. A lot of the elements of it have look a little like kindergarten. On the surface. And but I think what we have found by putting people in situations where they need to solve a problem that they have no idea how to get through. Most of the problems we face these days start that way. At least the interesting ones do. And that ability to discover in yourself, what does an insight feel like, where you actually see something you thought you knew differently, has a very powerful shift in by stepping out, by using these tools in different ways, by loosening up. I suddenly am smarter than I thought I was. A lot of people, and when I say that, it's the notion that I wouldn't have been able to do this before I tried some of this stuff out, before I was willing to let a team interact with me in these kinds of ways, before I was willing to go, I'm really anxious, I need to get to that answer as fast as I can. Taking the deep breath, getting a large range of answers, using some tools and starting to see patterns I never thought I could get to before. And what we've seen over and over is the quality of your work changes, and we've done this in a lot of companies who've evaluated work on design thinking and work off design thinking, and what is not just did it get done on time, but is the quality of what was put out better? Is it satisfying needs? Is it making us money? more effectively. And we've seen over and over that the stuff that designers used to use to create stuff can be used by lots of people. And it's everything, and we love it. We started out some of the tools, and I'm thinking about, we do a tool called mind mapping, where you basically have something you want to think about, and I need to make all the connections about this thing, and whether it's shopping or a carbon atom. You basically go through and empty your mind and lay it out. And it's a nice way of making connections, and you go all the way out till you just start literally asking questions. And we had chemies, right, who would take the tool, go back home to their fume hoods, right, and they'd be working on a problem, and somebody would start mind mapping, and their buddy would, what are you doing? What are you doing writing on the fume? And I said, I think I've got it. This links to this. Right? It's like, where did you learn to do that? Like, oh yeah, that's one of those design thinking things. Like, where do I get some of that?
Yeah.
So what we've seen is you can take your kind of current set of skills, current set of thinking, and you can do the yes and build on them with some of the tools and just do a little better. I think what's fascinating, though, is that larger practice. And as I said, if you're an engineer, it takes years to get good at it. But as you start to get good at a collection of these tools, as you start to inform and then really energize groups, you start getting to much more interesting things more regularly. And when I say interesting things, it's small-scale usability stuff, right? I need to have a new way of helping seniors, let others know when they fall, all the way to very large-scale complex problems. So we see this getting used throughout that continuum.
Yeah. So really, a couple of things that really strike me: the yes and building upon ways of doing things currently, but also there is this need to invest the time, the energy, but also to try things on, to create this environment, which is what happens.
Yep.
I've seen with different groups and teams that you've worked with.
Yep.
So they can try these tools and figure out, some of them may be applicable, some may not, where they occur and the like. And just to transition a little bit, to explore just maybe some insights. I think you recently wrote an article that was quite interesting, and it based on some research you did. And when we think about how we apply design thinking in more of a process-heavy environment,
sure.
There's kind of a way of thinking or kind of a key insight, and there's many, but one in particular I thought maybe we could dive into a little bit, this issue about framing and reframing, and then you had kind of three major findings that I think would be interesting for folks to hear about.
Yeah, so for me, the real power of design thinking, and this is kind of laddering up from the tools, as you said, is my ability to reframe a problem I've got. And when I said our students will challenge, is that the right problem to be solving? That's kind of the core of a reframing. It's that sense of you don't just accept what you got, I can see it from different ways. And there's some advantages to doing that. So, for example, and I think kind of the next slide, sometimes you basically need more solutions. I just don't have enough solutions. And if I had more solutions, my sense is I'd probably have a better end result. And a classic example of this is if someone says, I need a bridge. I need a bridge. You're from Stanford Engineering, right? Give me a bridge. And if you accept that, right, you could build a suspension bridge, cantilever bridge, but your solutions are going to be all within a bridge space. Lots of bridges, different kinds, but all bridges. And if you ask why do you need a bridge? The answer may be, I need to get across the river. And now suddenly the solution space changes. It changes from bridges to maybe a boat would work. Maybe if I start looking at the river and your skills, maybe you can swim across. Point being, there's a very different solution space. And if I ask why again, why do you need to get across a river? The answer is, well, I need to tell somebody on the other side something really important. Now the solution space changes again. So my point, these are all ways of getting to a reframe. Each why question opens it up and effectively reframes the problem that you, because you were simply given the problem and didn't question it, you may be answering the wrong question, right? So that's one. So what I just gave you is I need more answers to a problem. Easy way to get it. That asking why over and over, framing it differently, different answers come. So that's kind of the starting point and sort of the simplest way we think of the advantages of design thinking. Just get more ideas.
Well, and I think that just one more thought on that is that, again, in a process-driven environment, so often as you alluded to earlier, we're given, here's the problem.
Yep.
Go solve it. Here's a system that we currently have or one that we need to create to meet this need. Yep. And recognizing that culturally and environmentally, the organization you work in, there can be some pushback, but
sure.
Really the value of asking why and to looking at different ways of framing can often lead to the fact that we don't create we don't build it and nobody comes at the end because that wasn't really the system that we needed or that really didn't address the issue that was
exactly at the core. Right. And actually what you just said kind of leads to the next issue. And the next one is you actually cannot solve the problem as it is framed. You just can't get there from here. And classic, and one that came out of my work, we were working with Shure Microphone, and Shure sells microphones to the largest seller of microphones in the world, and they sell them to a lot of rock musicians, and they noted that the customers, their rock musicians, were losing their hearing. And that's kind of a catastrophe, and losing it in really unpleasant ways. Tinnitus, ringing in the ears. So they were concerned, how do we help our customers? How do we protect them? And they believed that if they provided a kind of earplug that could let them hear and essentially take them to an audiologist and get what was seen as a prophylactic solution, something that could reduce sound levels and protect their hearing, this would be a really important thing to do. Huge need, huge need. And when we tried it out, musicians went, no effing way am I putting, right, a hearing, that's horrible, I won't do it, I won't do it. And Shure initially was like, this is really discouraging, right? They don't want it. And again, if you think of a musician as a, 16-year-old, rock gods don't wear hearing aids, right? Okay. What's fascinating was the reframe, and as we asked, and this was a displacement where we asked people to go through a period of time of trying out some rough prototypes all the way to getting them to perform in front of an audience. They started to discover a lot of things about their own performance that these things gave them they didn't know. One, actually couldn't hear themselves on stage. Suddenly I could hear myself. Suddenly, with a wireless system, I could move around on stage and I wasn't locked to the little speaker that was the only thing I could hear. The engineers on stage loved it because now suddenly I wasn't getting feedback between the on-stage speakers and microphones. Suddenly, the whole ecosystem started to change and we could solve the problem of hearing protection. The final result, we never, ever talked about hearing protection, ever. That would kill the project. But the reframe around performance created a whole suite of solutions, of new processes. It changed how musicians play on stage. And yes, within the last 6 years, rates of hearing loss among musicians have gone down. So it worked. But the reframe was critical, and if you led with that initial frame, the problem wasn't solvable.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very applicable.
Yeah.
There's one more piece that we wanted to touch on. There was a third element here, and share a little bit about that.
So we are in a changing world. It's a changing world both from increase of technological horsepower. Processing power is doubling every 16 months. We are having environmental issues that are seem insurmountable. Social issues, customers expecting far more, not just a product or a service, but I want to be transformation. So this is a world you're working in, and suddenly your solutions need to operate in essentially unbounded space. A lot of different elements come together. We refer to these as wicked problems. And if you are doing anything interesting today, it's going to have some aspect of that wicked problem. And we believe that design thinking is a really important way to begin to creatively find threads, find solutions that can pull all the aspects of that problem that have to work together. Right? If you take it apart, you may not be able to get it put back together again. Right? Meaning take it apart, solve everything independently, put it back together. Design thinking is very useful at solving problems in total, getting that first path through the problem. Suddenly I get it. I see how the whole piece can work together. Doesn't mean you're not going to go back and use those other tools to refine it, to really get it right. But creatively helping people engage wicked problems, we found, is one of the more powerful things that design thinking offers us.
And so this changing one element and looking at the way it affects others. So focusing on that, not being afraid to take on the wicked problem, but then kind of playing with different aspects, engaging with different aspects rather than...
Yeah, it's the sense of the kind of systems problems we're looking at are ecologies, right? And whether it's dealing with culture that's an ecology or our own ecology. And if you come from a world where I have an engine, I can optimize the engine by taking it apart and putting it back together, and it's going to work every time. That's great. Unfortunately, that's not the environment you live in. And the problems you are wrestling with as a business, right, as a service, as a nonprofit, policy, Steve Jobs' iPhone. And those apps address that very complicated ecosystem. And suddenly lots of people were now able to engage that complex ecosystem in ways that single company and a few designers could never, ever imagined. So we have some hopes that design thinking in conjunction with other disciplines, other deep knowledge and skill will help us get at some of these wicked problems that are both scary, but they also represent, if you look at it right, really, really interesting opportunity.
Great. We have gotten a host of questions. I want to thank everybody who's on the line and has forwarded those to us. We're going to take a few minutes now. I'm going to pass it back to Ryan Chin. Ryan's got some information we'd like to share, and then we're going to come back and take a few of those questions. Thank you, Michael.
So first of all, let me thank Tim and Michael. That was really enjoyable. I also wanted to thank all our participants for being here today. I do want to remind you that we probably won't be able to get to all the questions, and we thank you so much for submitting those. Thank you for participating today. One last reminder that we are recording this, and we will send out a link to this recording or to this presentation and webinar, so you can watch it later. Let me tell one quick story where I believe that I had deep knowledge, but it was the creativity that Michael was able to bring to an experience. So he did a design thinking exercise, and they applied it to the performance evaluation. It was maybe the most enjoyable way I've ever looked at performance evaluations and to rethink that experience. And if you one day maybe you'll see the video, it was just terrific and actually made me rethink how I give and provide from performance evaluations. Again, my name is Ryan Chin. I'm with the Stanford Center for Professional Development. Just to tell you a little bit about our center, who is presenting this webinar today. We consider ourselves a bridge between Stanford and industry, and that means that we extend Stanford education, both graduate programs and professional educations, to working professionals. And we've been doing this for 45 years. On the graduate side, what we do is we actually allow people to watch Stanford graduate programs, and these can be on the disciplines through the School of Engineering. And in fact, you can earn a degree in electrical engineering, computer science, and management science engineering completely at a distance. Now, we also take the same research and teachings that our faculty do in their graduate courses and in their research, and we turn those into professional education courses. And those are short courses on more focused materials. Our most popular and most successful professional education program has been the Stanford Advanced Project Management Program. And one of the reasons I think that this program has been particularly successful is our partnership with IPS Learning. And that partnership has allowed us not only to take what the work of our faculty, Professor Ray Levitt is the academic director of this program, but also take IPS's experience in industry and really make this a powerful combination of both experience and research. And so we are now in our 15th year, over near 6,000 graduates, and so I think it speaks to the power of this program. The program is based on, you can see the set of courses here. There are 3 core courses, and then you'll take 3 elective courses. Our newest elective course is Project Innovation through Design Thinking. We're talking about design thinking today. And this course actually is being offered in a new model through our online courses. And will be offered this September here on campus. And it's our only time that we offer. We offer courses on campus twice a year. And this September will be the one time that we're offering Project Innovation through Design Thinking. So if you're interested, do want to recommend that you sign up quickly. It will sell out. So at this point, I'm going to ask if your interest in the Stanford Advanced Project Management Program. So I'm going to open the poll up now, and if you can please remember to submit your answers. I'll give you a few moments. And so while you're voting, I'll just tell you that the video that Michael showed, the session that Michael was doing on through the performance evaluations, and how this one he challenged the group was challenged to make a skit about it, and it was just the most enlightening way of how to approach and view that idea. All right, at this point, I think I'm going to just go ahead and again, thank you so much for submitting your answers. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll at this point. Thank you so much. And I'm going to remind you that the Stanford Advanced Project Management Program is offered in 3 different modes. So again, we teach it here at Stanford. That's in March and September. We typically hold it over 2 weeks. And so if you want to go to the website, and the website's down, the website is apm.stanford.edu. Once again, apm.stanford.edu. You can also see the contact information there. These courses are offered online throughout the year. Allowing you to take the courses asynchronously and at your own pace. And then through our partner, we also offer them at work. And so if you want to have them delivered, we have them delivered at many, many places throughout the country and, in fact, across the world. So if you're interested in that, you'll actually need to contact us, and we can and talk to us about how that can be done. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Tim and Michael to answer a few questions. All right. And with that, let's see.
All right. So, Michael, looking at the first question is kind of an intriguing one. Actually, just gets to more of a kind of at the personal level.
Yeah.
So, how do you account for introverted individuals? I mean, I kind of made a joke earlier because I get some teasing from some of my friends outside of work about this design thinking thing. You're just going and playing with toys, but you know, the reality is, I think many, you know, particularly technical professionals, they maybe are a little more on the introverted side.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of, it does rely on everyone's involvement.
Yep.
You know, what are your thoughts on that?
No, and that question is very close to my own heart. All evidence to the contrary, I'm actually an introvert. And with the definition that I'm not energized by groups. I love groups, but boy, need to find that quiet time. And to get to this idea, and certainly a lot of the public presentation of design thinking, it's very active, it seems very social, and boy, you have to be out there all the time. The reality is, as you use these different tools, especially we've found understanding people and using divergent thinking, meaning I really need to understand people from many different ways. Introverts are much better at doing that than extroverts. All right? Introverts are able to go inside and begin to see a lot of the different ways something could happen. The other piece that's interesting, most introverts that model abstractly, right? So we're taking reality and we're going to model it in many different ways. Introverts are very, very good at doing this. So what you find is within a team that begins to explore different tools and recognize people that essentially, and these tools, you said they are thinking skills. Those thinking skills can both be emphasized within the group, and if the group understands that that skill is different than how I approach the problem. So we spend a fair amount of time helping groups understand that as I go through this problem, There are going to be different thinking skills that are going to be emphasized. And some of those skills are going to be served much better by introverts, who may in fact be leading effort because they are the best at doing it. And as you get to converging, where I need to have that leadership and make that final decision, right? The extroverts come back once more.
Absolutely.
But it is absolutely a balance between those things, and we have found that you need to have everybody involved in both types. Absolutely critical of the process.
Great, excellent insight. You know, it's somewhat related, but really, you know, there is, for all of the excitement about the promise of design thinking and the successes we're seeing with it, I think there also can be kind of this skepticism.
Sure.
Even I made light of, you know, friends that tease me a little bit, but in seriousness, they respect it. But leadership sometimes thinks, you know, you alluded to it earlier, we've got a problem, cut to the chase, figure it out, solve it, move on, be efficient. So it almost gets to how do we help convince, it's not just leadership, but often there's a perception, how do we get people who don't really understand this to be supportive of it? So because it does have implications for more time, I think, particularly on the front end, although even fundamental project management says plan before you jump in and do it. That's some element. Sure. But the reality is we've got that tension about move fast. You know, we've got to be agile and move more quickly. Yet, so anyhow, I think I threw a few things in there.
No, and I have to say our experience in kind of corporate America adopting it, and we've seen it operate in a couple different ways. And stepping back, I gave the example of the chemies with their fume hoods, and mind mapping was an interesting way at Stanford where it was by small examples, small everyday examples of using parts of this that we started to build credibility, and people started to engage larger and larger parts of the process. In corporate America, we've seen it kind of operate a little differently where, and I'll give Deloitte as an example. They did a pretty extensive program where they looked at 6 ongoing projects, 3 of them, and they actually repeated it twice. 3 of the programs were done independent of design thinking, done in a traditional way. 3 of the programs on design thinking. And they then repeated it for another 6 just to kind of validate the response. And what they found was overwhelmingly, and some of the problems were problems that had been tried before and failed. The design thinking got them through it in different ways. The quality of work was different. Some of the problems around audit that seemed insurmountable, because if you frame it in a certain way, it cannot be changed. But reframing it, they actually found they could shift things that they thought were, these are orthodoxies that are immutable, and we can start to get around things. So they actually found the design thinking to give better results. The teams seem to be much more effective, both in the problem-solving component and the rollout. So this was, and my point of it was they essentially did their own internal experiment. It wasn't simply a workshop where I try it, there's no skin in the game. All the participants, their jobs were on the line. This was business as usual at Deloitte. So I think that's the piece we've seen. If there is skin in the game where I take this stuff seriously and I can't simply go back to business as usual. I need to follow through on it. We have seen learning happen. And this is no surprise. This is how we learn anything. But for organizations, that's essentially the challenge. You're learning a new set of skills. Initially, all of them are not comfortable, or they may seem to fly in the face of existing orthodoxies. And whether it is top-down, I feel it needs to be experience-based. You can't just do it as an abstract one-day workshop and say, now everybody go do it. It needs to be some level of immersion where I've got something at stake and my team needs to live with this for a period of time. That seems to be work best for our students and for the organizations we've seen really, really use it. Yeah.
It looks like we've got maybe time for one more question.
Oh, yeah, this is a fun one. I'll let you read it.
Well, so the question that was posed was, why do you think so many people address the symptoms by trying to create a way to offset the symptoms instead of addressing the problem?
Yeah.
really the source, and in fact resist. In fact, often they're not just looking at the wrong issue, but they actually resist taking on the source of the problem.
So I'm going to just reference Clayton Christensen and Innovator's Dilemma. He did a fascinating study on U.S. companies that essentially have crashed because to exactly this point, they addressed symptoms and didn't look at the problem, didn't look at that world around them. And I think so essentially it's an issue of framing, but it's an issue of framing that is not easy to resolve, since often the success of a company, and this is Clayton Christensen's premise, the success keeps you from seeing the world differently. Right? You have now framed a world based on your success, and you see everything in relation to what made you successful. If that world and its situation is starting to change, you do not see it clearly. So we get back to this seeing the water. And it is not, he paints out over 100 companies, only one of them was able to change over time, was able to actually innovate more than once in its existence. That is real. And his point was, this is a horrendous loss of resource, of energy, and the failure happens fast. So actually reframing is kind of an essential way to get out of that innovator's dilemma.
We've got about 2 more minutes.
Yeah.
Is there, we've mentioned that certainly as part of the program, we have a course we teach here, and design thinking is popping up in other areas. But if people wanted to find out more about design thinking, are there some resources available through the D School or otherwise
Absolutely.
where they might be able to learn a little more about this?
I think there is enormous amount of material now online. I think both in forms of video, in forms of using tools. I think we're getting a rich source of people who are documenting how they're doing this, where it's being used, kind of taking the mysticism out of it, right? This is not magic, right? This is people relying on a creative intuition that they've maybe gotten a little lazy with. But it's also kind of showing the power of what happens when you diverge before you converge, and you don't do both at the same time. And it sounds, as I said, some simple things like that can have some pretty strong changes. Another very simple thing we've seen is what you use to model a problem can often restrict what the possible solutions turn. You start to model it using some unexpected things. This classic example for us is we had students design chairs, and we gave them cardboard, and they came up with very ordinary solutions. We gave them pipe cleaners, and a number of the students said, well, this is a horrible material to design a chair out of. But a few started to bend and twist and go, I can come up with a completely different chair and use the compliance of the system and do this. And those are all the things we're now starting to see put out online as kind of they seem like, that's a cool trick. Let me try it out. But it's part of a larger way of thinking about how to understand customers deeply, how to have a dialogue with them, how to ask why, how to diverge and converge.
Great. Thank you. Michael, thank you so much. I think we're about at the end of our time.
With Peking University and do an exchange between Stanford engineering students, Peking University engineering students, and have them solve a problem that has to work in both cultures. In terms of background, I work with lots of marketers, designers, engineers, business people, have gotten the chance to do design research in lots of different countries and for lots of different kinds of work, whether it's product, service, new category development, and as I said, for lots of different companies. And companies that are both high-tech, consumable, nonprofits, and entities around the world. So it's kind of this background that we want to share with our students the belief that these are tools that can be applied in a lot of different contexts where innovation and creativity is essential. That's what you want to get out of it at the end, but it's going to be applied in sort of non-traditional, potentially we're going to have computer science people, biochem, educators. They need creativity. They need that sense of seeing the world differently just as much as a designer who has to come up with a new iPhone.
I think it brings up
biochemistry or computer science with the skills that designers have. So that was kind of the starting point for the D.
Great. So in terms of your background, you teach at the D school, and for those who haven't had a chance to see that, it's a non-traditional, interesting place. The philosophy behind that in terms of this interdisciplinary approach and bringing together, it's rather unique even at Stanford, but also in general.
Yeah, the core philosophy in the D is that people learn best by doing, and that they've created an environment that you basically build and develop design thinking skills through project work. And project work, things that are important, not just to you, but to essentially a larger community, things that are going to make a difference. There's an enormous push about this idea of extreme collaboration. Everything is done in teams with the belief that at the end of the day, you are going to go out and work with teams. So how do you really be creative in groups? So that's really essential. In terms of my own practice, I also do a course in the D called Cross-Cultural Design, where we take, and part of innovation is that new thing fits into our world, makes that world in some way better, creates new value, satisfies needs, which is sort of the foundation of my course. And design thinking is a way of more consistently bringing together the kind of deep knowledge of people and culture that you need to have in order to get that invention, that's something new, to actually stick, to actually work. And you know, I think we came from a place where we see, you know, graveyards products that have failed, where we've put phenomenal technology, energy, human resource and capital, and it hasn't connected. We look at pad-based computing, and that was something that we spent 20, 30 years pursuing, and we just got it right. We just got it right. And I think the foundation here is how can we more consistently get it right? And that's where design thinking came from.
It's interesting, I think, again, in terms of some people who may say, well, how does this fit in a world, particularly we've got a lot of individuals who Great. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. And it's my pleasure today that we have Michael Berry with us. Michael is a consulting professor at Stanford D School, or the Design School. And today's format is maybe a little different from what some of you who attend these sessions may be used to. Michael and I are going to have a conversation about design thinking, and specifically not only some background on design thinking, but also how that plays in the world of more of a process-centered kind of an environment. But to start with, Michael, share a little bit about your background. It's quite interesting in how you've gotten to the D School, and also some of the things that you do beyond that.
Yeah, the D School is an interesting venture. I have taught at Stanford a course called Need Finding for a lot of years, and the D School was a venture at Stanford that said, let's figure out how we not just teach engineers and designers, but start teaching other branches of engineering, other areas of the school about this thing called design, with the belief that we can help whatever you're doing, whether it's
been interesting. You know, when we talk about what is design thinking, I think there's a sense out there, particularly in this more process environment, the world of project program management, the sense that design thinking is a product, you know, it's for product designers. It's the IDEOs of the world. It's the Apples. And I know, just kind of a side note, we were chatting, and you once had an interesting question. What came first, innovation or design thinking? Someone asked. I'm just kind of curious. Maybe you could provide a little perspective on that.
Yeah. certainly there is a lot of buzz about design thinking, and it feels like, gee, maybe is it a fad or a trend? I would say it's a really good question. Innovation is essentially the thing we're interested in, and we have always had innovation. And I think what design thinking is looking at is how do we increase the chance that we're going to get interesting, compelling innovation more often. And just to clarify, it's easy to mistake invention for innovation. And invention is coming up with something new. And the patent offices are full of wonderful new things that nobody wants. Part of innovation and part of the foundation